We've just a week to go now before we're live on stage with the new show, Cocaine Cowboys. Final tickets on sale from mcd.ie or venues. You'll have to excuse my ignorance now, but Anthony Stokes, like, how famous a footballer is he?
Well, he's probably become famous for all the wrong reasons. But if you go back to like 2005, 2004, he was like the really big hope for Irish football. I mean, he was one of these guys who was hyped up in advance that he was going to be a world-class footballer.
Right.
So like these, I know you don't know much about the old kicking the ball around.
I know a little.
But like these guys, like, you know, when the time they're 14, 15, 16, you get this chat around them that this guy is something special. And you have that already now, like with some young Irish players.
Yeah.
Anthony Stokes was really, really going to be, people believed he could be like world class. And you see something like, even like Evan Ferguson, who's playing for Brighton now. I mean, people were talking about him being a multi-million player.
Yeah.
However, it didn't really happen.
So his father owned the Players' Lounge pub.
His father owned the Players' Lounge pub. You know, Anthony was actually from, his family are from the North Inner City, but he actually, I think he went to a school on the south side, a very well renowned, you know, I think it's a private school.
What school?
It was Terenure College, I think. Yeah, Terenure College, as far as I know. But he was one of these guys who you know, very technically, you know, good player. He played for Arsenal as a teenager, and people really had big hopes for him. He was under Liam Brady's, was looking after the youth team at that stage.
Then he sort of fell into the wrong company, shall we say?
Well, he fell into the wrong company. It didn't work out for him at Arsenal. He had a loan in Scottish football, and then eventually moved to Sunderland. And as he was being hyped up, then the other stories started coming out that he was kind of not so much a big drinker or partier, but just one of those people, I suppose, that doesn't have their head straight. Now, his father, John Stokes, simultaneously, I suppose, was also hitting the media as Anthony Stokes was hitting the big time, because John Stokes owned a pub called the Players' Lounge in Fairview. And the pub started becoming a known hangout, I suppose, for dissident Republicans. John Stokes kind of embraced that image at the time as well. If you remember, didn't he put up a sign saying the Queen wasn't welcome here and all of that kind of stuff? But yeah, it became
a meeting place for Alan Ryan and co.
It became a meeting,
the Real IRA tough boys.
It became very much the meeting place for them. As Alan Ryan, as people will remember, became kind of the head of the Dublin brigade of the Real IRA. He had served time for IRA offences, but when he got out, he kind of managed to bring a load of young men together, I suppose, and put a stamp on, you know, the IRA were back, I suppose, the Real IRA at the time. And part of that was hanging around in the Players' Lounge. You know, he was also doing security on a number of doors. And he started putting the squeeze, I suppose, on drug dealers around the city, particularly in that kind of area.
Which was the bigger part of it. And he was very ambitious. He didn't just go for the small-time dealers. He went for the big boys too.
Yeah.
He went for the likes of Mick and the Panda Kelly. He went for the likes of Mr. Big in Coolock. He demanded money from Eamon Kelly, the sort of the godfather of criminals at that point, who was the mentor to many. He went for them all.
Yeah, he went for them all. You know, I think it would cause a bit of a shock. Like we know, Sherlock, we can hear it in the Regency trial, this kind of symbiotic relationship between dissident Republicans and drug dealing gangs. But Alan Ryan sort of smashed that consensus and just started demanding money off everybody. And in particular, he demanded money off people that had Republican connections, like Eamon Kelly, who had been kind of half in
himself as untouchable from that kind of thing.
Yes, and who'd like spent his whole life associating with Republican figures. Another one of the people that he put the lean on big time was a guy called Sean Hunt in Ballyfermot.
Yes.
I mean, Sean Hunt was not probably a member of the IRA. I don't know, they still don't publish their membership lists, but he was very much associated with the provisional IRA and had been involved in cigarette smuggling in a very serious way, as had the IRA over generations. So Alan Ryan put the squeeze on him. Sean Hunt
was actually known as the smuggler. That was his nickname. And he, of course, had discovered a family of young men in Ballyfermot who he had sort of mentored to become hitmen for hire, the Wilson family. And he prided himself, I think, in sort of being their agent. Such, and he would have hired them out to various people. They were allowed to use his house in Spain for a cooling down period in the aftermath of the murders. I think he trained people up as well, Hunt himself, in the art, the skill of killing. And he was the wrong man to cross. I mean, Alan Ryan crossed many a wrong man, to be honest with you, but Hunt really was, because Hunt had these sort of people at his beck and call in his back pocket.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, after the squeeze was putting him, he hit back. I think there'd been people that called out to his door or whatever. I don't know if there'd been a physical assault, but in response, Sean Hunt got the Wilsons basically to carry out a shooting, attempted shooting on Alan Ryan in the Players' Lounge, where he'd been periodically on the door. Alan Wilson ultimately was involved. John Wilson as well was certainly involved. John Wilson was ultimately killed. Shots had been fired. An absolutely innocent doorman had been hit, was very, very lucky to survive. And that pushed the Players' Lounge into the public attention in a way it hadn't been before as the reporting on this went on, particularly obviously when you have somebody innocent like that caught up in the crossfire. It always generates that bit more publicity. And it came
back, of course, in 21 when Wilson was before the courts.
It did.
When he was named then as a member of the Kinahan crime gang, but he was jailed for 10 years for his role in that plot to murder 3 men outside the Players' Lounge. So it's a story that keeps coming back to haunt Anthony Stokes, isn't it?
It is. And John, look, in fairness, Anthony Stokes had nothing to do with it. But John Stokes, in the aftermath, he kind of embraced that Alan Ryan, or Alan Ryan certainly, and him continued to have that association in the Players' Lounge. Now, obviously, John Stokes is a pub owner, has nothing to do with anything to do with dissident Republican activity. However, they were associating there in that pub. So John Stokes became a kind of a figure. As I said, he put up when the Queen was, I can't even remember what year that was. He put up a poster, she's not welcome in the Players' Lounge. But ultimately, Alan Ryan was shot dead. And after Alan Ryan was shot dead, it was a massive story in gangland terms, because really at the time Alan Ryan was killed, he was the first senior Republican figure to be taken out by a drugs gang.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing because you said he put up a poster. I'm looking at the picture of the Players' Lounge and the banner that covers the entire top of it. I mean, this is not a poster with a picture of the Queen on each side and a red, band thing. Officially barred from this pub. She and all her family are officially barred from this pub. And he was ordered in March of 2011 to take it down. To remove it. Judge Paul Kelly said to John Stokes, made him promise to remove the sign and not to erect another one. It was a 60-foot by 20-foot banner.
It was.
That's more than a poster.
Yeah. So look, John Stokes, I think he's spoken about his Republican leanings. Obviously, there's a difference. People can be Republican, but I mean that association was there. So obviously, then Alan Ryan was shot dead. It was a huge story in gangland terms, but it was also one of those stories that captured the political imagination as well, partly because after his murder, there was a colour party carried out in his front garden. I mean, in a way, even more than the murder, this created political outrage because it was, it was in the heart of Dublin. I mean, these things obviously had happened during the Troubles in the north, but what happened was his coffin was brought out the front, masked men appeared and fired a volley of shots over his coffin, and it sparked political outrage. The government were really, really unhappy with this kind of open display of paramilitarism. So Anthony Stokes at that stage was playing in Scotland, was playing in for Celtic, doing very well actually at that stage. And subsequently there was a memorial for Alan Ryan, and it was held in Crumlin. We were actually there, and we actually took photos outside it, but we didn't actually get Anthony Stokes at the time. But there was a collection of dissident Republican figures from across the island came along to it, and Anthony Stokes was attended. He posed for a social media picture, and that caused kind of outrage in Scotland as well, because obviously Celtic have been associated with, over the years, republicanism, but the club have made a really strong efforts to stamp out that association, just like Rangers have with loyalism. So they kick people out for IRA chants and things like that. So Anthony Stokes was forced to apologise. They asked him to, I don't know if they actually forced him to apologise, but they took him in and said this wasn't acceptable. In subsequent years then, Anthony Stokes, I'm going to try and actually have a list of some of the clubs he went for. So he started off obviously with Arsenal, then Sunderland, Celtic, so there was other clubs in between, went to Blackburn, and then you see his career starts to drift off.
Is that because of his age now? Or
No, it's not because of his age, because he's still a young man, but it just isn't happening for him. There's disciplinary issues. People speak about him not taking direction from managers, relatively minor, but in football, he just didn't make it, and the clubs start dropping down. He played in Greece, wasn't it? He ended up at one point in playing in Iran, which was,
I imagine that's probably the last place you want to be playing.
Yeah, those are huge crowds, and football's very big. But I mean, if you consider where he's come from one of the brightest prospects in the Premier League as a teenager, it was a sort of fall from grace. Ultimately, he played for Ireland a number of times, but again didn't make the grade, and so he retired, and then there was a number of other incidents. Actually, I suppose another one of the examples of why clubs started to not want to touch him was in 2013. I don't know if you remember, he got in a fight with an Elvis impersonator in Temple Bar.
Yeah.
Now, a very serious assault. The Elvis impersonator, he's spoken subsequently to the Sunday World and many other papers, but he was really, really suffered a very, very serious assault, again, over nothing in a pub. And these sort of things, it was terrible. His injuries were brutal, but it's also, football clubs don't want to be associated with that. They don't want to touch people who are having these kinds of problems. When Anthony Stokes retired, there was a number of other issues were being spoken about, privately and maybe less in the media. But again, he was at one point living in Scotland. A relationship he had been in had come to an end. And, he had then, as it was described in court, gone on a sort of basically a campaign of abuse involving his ex with a series of abusive text messages. He'd been brought to court. He'd been convicted of that offence. And in the aftermath, then she had gone back to court or gone back to the police, made another complaint saying that he continued to harass her. He'd been ordered to appear in court but hadn't. And in 2021, an arrest warrant was issued for his arrest in Scotland. In the meantime, he'd in Ireland, he continued to be living in Dublin for the most part. And in January 2023, he was arrested in Dublin after police had stopped the car. He'd been charged with a number of driving offences on that occasion, including, not having insurance. But they'd made a seizure of 4.5, what they described at the time was suspected drugs worth 4,500.
Suspected to be cocaine.
Suspected to be cocaine. He'd been brought to court and charged in relation for drugs for sale and supply. Still a relatively small amount in the scheme of things, but enough to hit that barrier. And
again, a lot for when you look back at him and the promising career he had. Any sort of footballer, one time promising or even currently caught at that level of cocaine. It's not like a tenner's worth.
No, it's definitely not. And of course, I don't know what he would have been earning at the height of his career, but you would have been imagined, when he was playing for Sunderland or whatever, they signed him for 2 million, I think, at the time. He probably would have been earning something like 20,000 a week, flat off. So a lot of money, but ultimately,
that case came to court last week.
Last month.
Sorry, last month.
Yeah.
And there had been a delay in the process of chemically, basically examining the substance that is suspected of being cocaine. And as a result, those charges were struck out.
They were struck out. So, it's like, you hear these things all the time. The police, sometimes people just plead guilty, obviously, but, he had contested the case and he had asked for this to be, the seizure, the powder that was seized, to be tested to prove it was cocaine. The state has a problem with the forensic labs, that they're overworked or whatever. They hadn't managed to do it, and so the case was struck out.
Had they not managed to do it at all or on time?
Well, they hadn't managed to produce a certificate of analysis.
Right.
And it goes back to, obviously people are innocent until proven guilty, and this was something that the state failed to provide. So the case was struck out, and then we learned this week that he'd handed himself into Scotland in relation to the warrant that was issued regarding the harassment of his ex. So he'd flown voluntarily to Scotland and handed himself in, and that's where he is now.
So he's going to be 30 days in prison there.
30 days in prison.
Yeah.
And it is, I think he's 35 years old. So, at the age of 35, Ronaldo is nearly 40 and he's still playing. But there's plenty of other players in the Premier League at the age of 35 that are performing at a high level. People that are older as well. There's many people, but Anthony Stokes is long gone, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible fall from grace, I would think. It's fair to say. If you consider some of his contemporaries are probably still earning 30, 40, 50,000 even a week in the Premier League, would still be playing it well into their mid-30s, it is a sad outcome, I think.
He's doing porridge.
Yeah.
Okay, Niall, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.